Welcome back, vintage camera lovers, to another trip down memory lane, this time celebrating a legend of the Nikkor lens catalogue, the 105mm f2.5. Was this the lens used to photograph the famous Afghan girl portrait, or was it a 180? Who cares? It's still a classic lens. This is my own copy, the so-called K version, one of almost 58,000 units produced between 1974 and 1977. The serial number of 684158 places it towards the start of that run, making it around half a century old. But as we'll discover, the optical design dates from 1971 and was employed in multiple versions and updates all the way up to 2005, over 3 decades and almost 1 million units later. I bought my 105 2.5 from 5 Star Camera, one of my favourite shops for vintage gear in the Shinjuku area of Tokyo, although eagle-eyed viewers may notice I'm wearing a t-shirt from Nissin Camera, another great vintage store, but this one in Akihabara. Anyway, I paid 16,800 yen for it, which at the time I made this video was about £87 or $120, and that's typically half what you may have seen the 105 2.5 being sold for, but as you'll learn in this video, there's a very good reason for this. At this point, a big thanks to the invaluable wealth of information on Roland Vink's photosynthesis website, detailing the production runs and minutiae of Nikkor lenses. I'm also delighted the 105 2.5 is the subject of one of Nikon's excellent 1001 Night essays, providing valuable historic information from the actual people involved. These posts make great reading for any lens enthusiasts or reviewers and journalists wanting to get their facts right. From these sources, I learned the first version was the Nikkor P 10.5cm f2.5, designed by Zenji Wakimoto in 1949 and released in 1954 as the fastest lens available around this focal length. Yes, back then focal lengths were commonly measured in centimetres, not millimetres. This original design employed a sonar construction with 5 elements in 3 groups and was used for the next 17 years. Then in 1971, the optics were redesigned by Yoshiyuki Shimizu, who previously trained under Wakimoto-san. His design was completed in 1966 and became commercially available in 1971. His design was based on the Zenithal type, with 5 elements in 4 groups, employing thick convex lenses rather than the asymmetric components of the previous sonar design. Anyway, this core optical design would go mostly unchanged for the next 34 years, taking it into the next millennium. Indeed, the biggest changes over the years was to the physical design, and in particular Nikon's evolving means of controlling and communicating the actual aperture value to the camera body. For the models produced up to 1977, including my own sample, the aperture was communicated using a coupling affectionately known as rabbit ears, which mated with a pin on the camera body. These are known as non-AI or pre-AI lenses. Then Nikon came up with a new means of communicating the aperture to the body, known as auto-indexing, or AI for short. These feature a ridge or tab on the back of their aperture rings that pushes a lever around the mount on newer bodies. But for backwards compatibility with older bodies, the rabbit ears remained for some time, and Nikon also drilled holes or nostrils in each to help illuminate a second smaller row of aperture numbers that allowed them to be more visible in the viewfinders of newer bodies. The AI version of the 105 2.5 was produced between 1977 and 1981. Then in 1981 came the AIS version, a further refinement in aperture control. The AIS version of the 105 2.5 had the longest production run, between 1981 and 2005, and it also featured a built-in lens hood. Now, there were other physical differences to note, including the design and style of the manual focusing rings and even the minimum aperture value. For instance, my own K version stops down to f32, while the later AI and AIS versions had a minimum aperture of f22. While there are also some differences in lens coatings over the life of the 105 2.5, the actual optical construction remained essentially the same between 1971 and 2005, so most samples from that period should share roughly similar image quality, with the biggest optical differences today more likely being down to aging issues like fungus or clouding. But depending on your body, the different aperture couplings could be an issue. First things first, if you're intending to adapt the lens to a modern mirrorless camera, you're absolutely free to use any version of this lens without a problem. The aperture diaphragm physically opens and closes as you turn the ring regardless of the body, so you can set whatever value you like and your camera should be able to meter it appropriately. But if you intend to mount it on a Nikon body, whether a vintage SLR or a more modern DSLR, you need to be more careful. In particular, trying to mount one of the oldest pre- or non-AI lenses on a post-1977 body could damage the AI coupling on the body. So if you intend to use the Nikon 105 2.5 on a Nikon SLR made after 1977, or one of their DSLRs which includes the coupling, you're going to have to go for an AI or AIS version. And this is why you'll typically see the AI and especially the AIS versions selling for much higher prices, even though they're essentially optically the same as my older K version. In fact, at the place I bought my lens, there were AI and AIS versions selling for double or even triple what I paid for mine. It is, however, possible to modify a non-AI lens, either by expertly cutting your own notch in exactly the right place, or more reliably, using one of the Nikon conversion kits, which literally just involves swapping the aperture ring for one with the required notch. Now, these have long been discontinued, but if you fancy searching the used market, you're going to be looking for AI Kit 39 for this particular lens, or just try to find someone who can manually make the modification. For instance, CamSurf near to me in Sussex in the UK can do it for about £72. While I do have some Nikon SLRs and DSLRs that I would like to try this lens on, I've decided to keep it intact for now and simply adapt it to a modern mirrorless camera. Remember, if you are adapting it to mirrorless, it does not matter which version of the lens you buy. I have a K&F concept F to L mount adapter here, allowing me to fit the lens onto my Lumix S1R2 body, not only enjoying its 45 megapixel images, but also exploiting the in-body stabilization and wealth of manual focusing assistance, as yes, this is a manual focus lens only. Okay, so let's have a quick look around the lens. In terms of design, the 105 2.5 is immediately recognizable as a Nikkor lens from this era, with familiar etchings and grip style. Measuring 62mm in diameter, 70mm long and weighing 426 grams, it's satisfyingly compact and solid, built from metal with hard rubber grips on the rings. The aperture ring runs from f2.5 to f32 on my K version, and note the colour-coded values indicating the series. A small twist takes you to an unmarked f2.8 aperture, after which the steps are in one-stop increments with clicked feedback. Like other Nikkor lenses of this time, turning the aperture ring directly adjusts the diaphragm regardless of the body type, which allows you to easily adapt them to most cameras. Towards the end of the barrel is a smooth manual focusing ring, although on my sample the stiffness did vary as it turned. Note the focusing distance markings in both feet and meters, running from infinity down to just under 1 meter with hard stops at each end. The focusing ring has a generous throw of around 180 degrees from furthest to closest, allowing very fine adjustments. Notice how the barrel extends with the focusing ring moving further outwards, while the inner tube extends further still. The overall length extends from 70 to 83mm as you focus from infinity to the closest distance. Meanwhile, the filter thread measures 52mm. As a size comparison, here's the lens mounted via an adapter on a Lumix S1R2 body. And now here's the Lumix S85 1.8, a native L-mount lens that doesn't need an adapter. Obviously, if you were to mount the Nikkor lens on an older SLR or DSLR, it's going to look shorter because it won't need the adapter. Now, if you are adapting the lens onto a modern mirrorless camera, you can exploit various guides to help you nail the focus. Here it's on an Lumix S1R2 with focus peaking enabled and indicating the focused areas with blue outlines. It's even easier if you magnify the live view for a closer look. I was certainly able to manually focus the 105 2.5 fairly easily, and I actually enjoy the way manual focusing slows you down a little bit versus a fully automatic focusing system. And in terms of exposure, I just set the camera to aperture priority, allowing it to meter the incoming light and choose the shutter speed and ISO to match my chosen aperture value on the lens, even though it wasn't aware of the actual f number that I'd selected. And as a reminder, the aperture won't be recorded in your EXIF data, so if you do need a record of what aperture you used, make a written note like you would in the old film days. Okay, so let's see what it can do around Brighton roughly 50 years after it was first made. Do remember that these results are reflective of my own sample and others may vary due to age and condition. Let's start with my distant landscape test, and this time the mild telephoto coverage means there's already enough detail in much of the frame, so I've not angled it here. This first image was taken with the aperture wide open at f2.5, and taking a closer look in the middle shows a reasonable degree of sharpness out of the gate. Not super crisp, but certainly ideal for portraits as we'll see. Stopping my sample down a tad to f2.8 made no difference here, so let's now close the aperture to f4, where there's a visible boost in sharpness and contrast. So unless you're absolutely chasing the greatest background blur, I'd always recommend shooting this lens at f4 onwards, at least for the best sharpness. Close it one stop further to f5.6 and it becomes even crisper, and I'd say this aperture along with f8 represent the lens performing at its best in terms of sharpness and contrast. Meanwhile, at f11 it manages to maintain most of that quality, but from f16 onwards, diffraction becomes your enemy with steadily reduced sharpness. I'll show you the f32 version since it's pretty unique, but there's no way that I'd be using it. Returning now to the f2.5 sample and heading into the far edge of the image, reveals some inevitable darkening due to vignetting, as well as a little softening and some coloured fringing in areas of high contrast. But given it's a 50-year-old design with no profile corrections, it's not looking that bad. Again, virtually no difference close to 2.8, but at f4 the vignetting lifts and the sharpness improves. And again, between f5.6 and f8, you'll be enjoying a visible boost in detail and contrast, with the best results from this lens in that regard. Meanwhile, from f11 onwards, the overall image softens again due to diffraction, so do avoid these values unless you absolutely need the largest depth of field, or are fighting the exposure, or perhaps are after defined sunstars. Next for portraits, the bread and butter for this lens. So here's how it looks wide open at f2.5, where you can see the separation that's possible at this focal length and aperture. Now it's not the obliteration that we see on some brighter lenses, but it is attractive nonetheless. Taking a closer look at my eyes also shows a decent degree of detail. And again, you can enjoy a boost in sharpness at f4, but I quite like the slightly more forgiving nature of the lens when it's shooting wide open. Let's now put the 105 2.5 on the left, and the much more recent Lumix S85 1.8 on the right, both wide open. Annoyingly, the lighting has changed a little bit between these shots, but you can still see the mild difference in coverage, and also their difference in rendering styles. The Lumix lens is half a century newer. Taking a closer look at the details shows the benefit of 50 years of optical advances. The Lumix lens may not be a high-end option, but remains sharper and has the benefit of autofocus too, but I still like the style of the 105 on the left, and I'm going to be showing you more examples later on. For a more formal evaluation of rendering, here's my bokeh ball test, although do note the white lights weren't working at this point, so it's just the blue bulbs in the background. You're looking at the 105 at f2.5 here, and positioned at its closest focusing distance of just under 1 meter. While this was considered quite close when it came out, today it feels quite limiting for smaller subjects, albeit still fine for portrait distances. The bokeh blobs are looking quite well behaved here though, with no onion ringing textures within and minimal outlining to mention. Their shape does become a little elongated towards the edges, but that's fairly normal for bright aperture lenses of this type. Next, here's the lens with the aperture ring turned very slightly to the unmarked f2.8 position, where again, despite an audible click, there's no visible difference, at least for my lens. This could be down to this particular sample. At f4 though, the aperture has definitely closed down, and you can easily see the geometric shape of the 7-bladed diaphragm system. Meanwhile, the blobs have become more uniform in shape across the frame. I think the result looks quite attractive here, and as seen in my earlier test, you'll also enjoy a boost in sharpness for the focused portion. At f5.6 onwards, the blobs become gradually smaller as the depth of field increases, so for the greatest separation and nicest rendering, I'd stick to f2.5 to f4. Okay, now it's time to wrap up with some more samples taken with my Nikkor 105 2.5 on a Lumix S1R2 body. The Nikkor 105 2.5 was a legend during its long production run, and justifiably so. It delivered a step up in performance over previous designs, delivering the killer combination of sharp details with smooth rendering, packed into a compact barrel that made it an ideal companion for travel and reportage, as well as dedicated portrait sessions. Today, it's striking how well the lens stands up against modern standards. Sure, it's not going to be as pin-sharp in the corners, nor as crisp when shot wide open, but the level of detail remains very impressive and the background blur is also attractive. I'm also fond of the focal length and aperture combination, which give a genuinely different looking result to the more typical 85s that are popular for portrait work today. Plus, who wants pin-sharp portraits anyway? Overall, I think it's still a classic lens for portrait work, and it's a fun model to add to your collection if you fancy a vintage manual focusing experience. And again, if you don't intend to mount it on a post-1977 Nikon film SLR or one of their DSLRs, you can bag yourself a bargain by going for a pre-AI version like mine. Right, that's it for this review. Do let me know in the comments what you think of the Nikkor 105 2.5 and which are your favourite vintage lenses, and crucially, if you'd like to see more reviews of old lenses from me on this channel. As always, thanks for watching, and I hope you get a chance to check out some of my other videos here, including my one of the Nikkor 50mm 1.4 AIS. Lovely lens. See you next time. Bye bye.